We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your home for all things MCU. And I know the last time we had an episode, we weren't exactly sure what we were going to cover, but we have decided to start our Ironheart coverage a little bit early by turning the spotlight on the villain so that we can focus on some of the other elements when we dive into our official predictions, which means that this episode is going to focus today all on the Hood, aka Anthony Ramos' character in the show. So, because we have a little bit to talk about with this character, I'm going to toss it over to Katie and she is going to get us started.
I want to first say, I think we've been calling him the Red Hood.
We definitely have, which is a DC character.
Which I didn't even know was a DC character. I don't even know where I got the Red Hood from. But regardless, I just want to clarify that because especially most likely if you listen to our What If episodes that cover or episode, but like coverage in general of it, we definitely were probably calling it the Red Hood. It's fine. But I actually kind of want to start there. So this is actually not really the first time we have seen the Hood in action. We did see the Hood make a debut, technically, in What If Season 3. If you don't remember, it was the Shang-Chi episode. There was a lot of weird things going on in that episode. And I know one of the big things that we pointed out was like, hey, this is super weird because we know nothing about the Hood.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what's going on. But we knew he was coming in Ironheart. We knew he was going to be making an appearance. And now we're here 6 months later. He is coming. So the Hood is originally known as Parker Robbins, who becomes the Hood. He's kind of a lowly criminal, and by lowly, I mean he does low-level crimes. That's it. He's really not a bad guy. He's actually doing a lot of it for his family, and he kind of just has a crime that goes just wrong enough that he ends up with both the Hood and the boots. I guess they're a matching set. I mean, gotta be stylish as a villain. I don't know. But, he ends up with these two things, and they're actually, okay, this is where it goes a little weird. A Nishanti demon's boots and cloak. And then he becomes the Hood. That's really the Spark Notes version of what we're going with.
And that's the origin story in 1.5 minutes.
And that's our episode. Thank you for listening.
And that's all I've got to say about that. No, that was a good primer, Kate. I think a couple of interesting tidbits to add there. The whole thing was supposedly set up by Dormammu to basically have Parker Robbins have these powers and become the Hood. So that was his kind of grand scheme. There's a lot of Dormammu then references, a lot of Dormammu, I would say, like, interaction in the sense that, like, he's kind of, not necessarily working directly for Dormammu, but there's a lot of connection to that character. So obviously that's someone that we already saw in the first Doctor Strange, I think is clearly a character who's going to be coming back around. I mean, we saw Clea in the second Doctor Strange. I do want to say I think it's a little odd that we're getting the Hood in an Ironheart show and not in something related to Doctor Strange, given that Doctor Strange has been our only touch point for Dormammu related things throughout the entire MCU. So that's a big piece of it as well, is the kind of like demon relation to the Hood and the relation to Dormammu. I think the other interesting thing here, just to like double click a little bit onto the abilities that he gets from the Hood and the boot set that Katie so nicely pointed out are so fashionable. He has the ability to like levitate or fly, some invisibility, some teleportation. He has some other mystical abilities. He can actually bring back people who have died, which is super interesting. So, again, like a very heavy mystical hand when it comes to Parker Robbins as the Hood.
I want to actually highlight kind of what you were saying with why Ironheart. Because I think this was a lot of our reasoning or our questions from the start as well. Because it just kind of was like, this seems weird. So I think there's kind of two prongs to this. One that follows kind of his actual storyline more in the comics, and one that follows kind of just where we've been before. So, actually, starting with the latter, this is not the first time we've had something like this happen where we have kind of a dichotomy between the villain and the hero, right? Two very different types of powers, power levels, etc. And actually, the original and first time it happened, although not exactly, no, maybe I should say the first time, but one of the first times it happened, although not exactly coming to fruition the way we thought, was actually supposedly a little bit more with Iron Man. Like, he's had quite a few foes that don't necessarily always match directly. I'm thinking what the Mandarin, and I'm using quotes, was supposed to be like,
Hmm.
was actually supposed to be a more mystical character. And obviously, that's not the direction they fully went, but it was kind of the essence of it, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously, we do see it in a lot of other showdowns, if you will. I mean, Captain America has faced various foes. Let's just say it that way, that don't always necessarily, I mean, like Red Skull, not human fully anymore. Like, there's a lot of,
Red Hulk is an even better
yeah,
example.
thank you. Exactly. Like, very different. Maybe you could consider both of those ground level, but like those were not the same. They were not in the same tier.
Yeah.
And I do know there's other examples, and I'm right now not pulling some of the best, but this is not the first time it's happened. So I do think too, when you have Iron Man, like for example, going up against Thanos, well, there's your tech against a cosmic entity that also has the like what, four stones at that point on the gauntlet. Like, there is definitely that mixing that has happened. We're gonna see a lot more of it with Doomsday, so it's not unheard of. Do we complain about it? Yeah, I
It
mean,
hurts my
let's be
brain a
honest.
little bit.
Well, we're always like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, am I gonna expect Bucky to punch Doctor Doom in the face? Like, no, like that does not equal the same to me. But it does happen, and so I do think mixing kind of more of this like technical with this mystical is not necessarily weird. I also do think you had Doctor Strange and Tony working together in Infinity War. There are times that we see as heroes this work as well, so it can work very well both together and apart. But kind of going to his origin, which I think kind of helps answer it a little bit, is while he is mystical and while Dormammu is messing around in all of this, at the end of the day, Parker Robbins, again, started as more of a low level criminal, not doing anything crazy, but something that when I was doing my research, they really talk about is his ambition.
Hmm.
And when he gets the cloak and he gets the boots, which are very important that he has both of them, apparently, because it's a matching set.
Obviously.
Red
What's the
Hood
outfit
and
without the
boots. Red
boots?
Hood and boots. Come on. But either way, it kind of accentuates this ambition to the point where he, who is a very charismatic person to begin with, kind of goes on this tirade, if you will, of being like, I want to take over the city underground. Now, he's working out of New York. Obviously, in this show, he'll be working out of Chicago because that is where Riri is. Also, New York is literally on fire. Kingpin is in a military state. Like, it's, we don't need to touch New York right now. I don't know what's happening. But he'll be in Chicago regardless. I'm assuming he will have the same kind of ambitions, that he's trying to essentially take over the city and be the ruler of the whole like underground criminal network, which is still a very grounded idea. He's happening to use a more mystical approach, but his actual intent is very grounded. He really just wants to be in charge.
It is super interesting because I feel like I read somewhere that his kind of like nemesis is Kingpin. Like, he is trying to basically unseat Kingpin as literally the kingpin of crime in New York in the comics. In the
Well,
comics.
actually, when Kingpin does get removed after, his amazing time that he's done amazing things, he is actually one of the first ones who tries to step in to kind of take over after Kingpin is gone. So I wouldn't be shocked. I know something that I saw a lot about too was he has, putting aside the mystical abilities, he has more charisma and leadership than Kingpin does. So a lot of people, when I was doing my research, a lot of articles and everything else were highlighting the fact that one of his most important powers is actually the fact that he has a group of extremely loyal followers. Now, Daredevil has kind of painted Kingpin to have this as well at this point, but that was actually a huge difference between the two of them is that the Hood actually has people who are very committed to him rather than Kingpin is kind of like your day to day. Like, come on, he's got his hand in things. Because at the end of the day, the other thing is the Hood rose up on the streets with them.
Mhm.
At this point, Kingpin not the same. He might have been a kid from New York, but now he is a millionaire making all this money and everything else versus the Hood is still standing with the people that he said he'd stand with. So I do think there's the difference there. I think they're cut from the same cloth though. So I do think it's very interesting to me that because of that they've had to make the Hood based also in Chicago, I think for that exact reason as well.
Oh, for sure. I definitely think that's a good point and an interesting reason for maybe that geographic change. I think too, knowing some of the delays with Ironheart in terms of its release and how long it has taken to see the light of day, I'm wondering if the reason that that took so long is because of what is happening now with the Daredevil story and understanding kind of the way the Kingpin is leveling up. To your point, is the opening then for the Hood and Parker Robbins to step into New York after everything blows up in Kingpin's face, which it inevitably will, whether that's in season 2, 3, 4 of Daredevil, in the next Spider Man, whatever. Does he relocate? Because I think, you put someone to the level of fame of Anthony Ramos in this role, and it should not, I'm not saying it won't be, but it should not be a villain who does not make it out of this series. I think this character has so many interesting things that he tries to do in terms of like working with Norman Osborn, who we may or may not ever see again because of all the Spider Man stuff, and joining the Cabal and things like that. He is someone who, and you were definitely touching on this, he brings people together and he brings villains together. So we've talked about for many, many years the idea of a Sinister Six. Well, maybe we're not going to get a Sinister Six, but I could see them doing an entire movie with a set of villains around the Hood, because he just constantly, when one group dissolves, he puts another one together. He's someone who is a connector and he brings people together. So I wonder if the timing is a little conspicuous, if they're setting him up for bigger things, knowing what we have going on Daredevil right now.
I think that asks the bigger question because, like, I even have this underlined in my notes of will we actually see him post Ironheart? The thing with a lot of, I mean, I won't even just say the shows, it's the shows and the movies, is these are one time villains. Not all of them. I'm not going to say that's true. I mean, unfortunately, the best example, it's because I have a picture of her staring at me, is the Scarlet Witch, which I know is not the best example because she was a hero. Well, she was a villain, then a hero, then a villain, and but then hopefully will be a hero again. So that's not the best example. And she's also like one of the most popular characters in the MCU and Marvel in general. But one example of somebody who was a villain and will be returning eventually.
Loki.
Loki, yeah, yeah. It's so hard because like these are all like the worst examples. I'm trying to think of like hero, or I'm trying to think of villains that aren't necessarily like beloved because you could say that about Bucky too.
Yeah, I mean, Kingpin has made it through now 4 seasons, going on to 5 seasons of television. So though and has been in multiple shows.
True.
So he was in Hawkeye, he was in Echo. I think he, as funny as it is, knowing the kind of connection between their level of ambition, and what they want, I think he is the blueprint for what someone like the Hood could be. Like, if we want to have, if we're going to eventually phase out Kingpin, which I'm not advocating for, I think D'Onofrio is just absolutely murdering the role at every turn. I'm not advocating that it's his time to hang up the white suit at all. But if they do ever decide, like, all right, we've done now X amount of seasons of Daredevil with the same bad guy, we can only do this so many times, but we want to keep going. It could be someone like the Hood who doesn't step into Daredevil, but steps into this kind of role of leading the ground level villains and the people who are perpetuating violence, your quote unquote like pettier to more grander crimes that are not necessarily the Avengers level. I mean, I think one of the cool things that we keep coming back to, or at least I do in my head, is the idea from Spider Man Homecoming. There's Avengers level threats, and then there's non Avengers level threats. And I think we need a really solid villain, or we benefit, I should say, from a really solid villain who can bring together groups at that non Avengers level threat and be that person.
Yeah, I guess my point that I was trying to make, but off the top of my head couldn't get there, was what's the likelihood of him actually returning? And I guess my point there was actually proven that off the top of my head, I cannot think of a villain, I think, other than Kingpin, that has been the main villain in something. Because I was going to say Mordo, but he also was not the main villain, and we haven't seen him return.
Well, that version, at least.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of who is like a main villain of a show or movie that lives to and I shouldn't say lives because they don't all die, but like regardless, lives to see another show or a movie or something of that nature. And that's what I'm trying to pinpoint, and by not being able to do that, I feel like I'm proving the possible point that we aren't going to see him again. And that, I think, is where that question lies, is like, is he going to make it out? Because I do see your points with, oh, he could move on to New York afterwards and all of this. I do think it's a little different because from what I was gathering from his origin, if they're going to probably have him based out of Chicago, I think it's not as powerful for him to not have the exact ties to New York City. I think it makes a lot more sense because it's his city that he was in, grew up in, rather than relocated into. So
That's a
I
fair
do think
point.
that's kind of an aspect. But I don't know. I think the question of will he make it past Ironheart is a very hard one, because my other big question was, if they just confiscate his boots and cloak, he's kind of nobody, right?
That is my understanding, is that he needs both of them in order to be enhanced in any way.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, from that perspective, I guess, like, in theory, on paper, he could be easily beaten, but at the same time, you think about, someone who has a crutch like that, their biggest defense is going to be protecting it. So I think you'd be really hard pressed to get that cloak or those boots off of him if he doesn't want them off.
Yeah, but I see that being how he ends.
I mean, it would be like taking Iron Man's suit away, right?
Right.
Like, it's just Tony Stark. And Tony's smart, and the Hood is smart and charismatic, to your point, and he's a very capable man, but he's not enhanced without the outfit, as you as you pointed out.
The whole get
So
up.
you're right. It could be that is the ending here, but I could see that being an open ending, in the sense that, like, they're confiscated. He has a lot of ties to the Sorcerer Supreme, not just Doctor Strange, but multiple iterations of the Sorcerer Supreme within the comics. And with that cloak and boots being so tied to Dormammu, should this series end with him potentially on the raft, which is something I would like to talk about, his ties to that, I think I could see an end scene being Anthony Ramos on the raft, the cloak and boots en route to New York to the Sanctum Sanctorum. You bring in Wong, who hasn't been making any cameos lately, but you could do that. And then not only are you telling a story that has a full arc, but then you're tying it to the MCU without making it so overtly tied to the larger MCU. And it wouldn't be hard to understand where she got those connections. She has connections to the Wakandans, who then have larger connections to the rest of the superhero community. So that would be like my perfect ending scene, is seeing how that is then his consequences ripple out to some of the other MCU properties and tie him back to the mystical elements of who he is and his abilities.
Yeah, I think it should. The same way that, like, this show is picking up directly after the second Black Panther.
Mhm.
So I think there definitely should be ramifications across both for her and for him. I would like to see him not die.
Yes.
Obviously, I don't think Riri's gonna kill him. I think we've seen plenty of our villains fall to their own demise because of their own greed or want or whatever else. They get blinded by it and they end up dying. I'd like to see him not die. I like what you kind of said about leaving it open ended because I do think this character has a lot to him. And I think to put him in a show like this, I don't have a problem with. I just don't think we're going to see the full capabilities of what he could become. And I think that's wasteful to me. This is not the first character that they've done this with, though. So I don't want to hold my breath.
I'm looking at you, Muse.
Please don't even. Please, why'd you even bring that up? Like, why'd you bring that
It
up?
was literally the quintessential example.
It was. No, it was. But I also wasn't even thinking about him. I was thinking about other examples. So my brain hadn't even gone there. You're not wrong, but there's been plenty of these characters that I think had so much potential. And in the comics, even if they are only like when we thought Muse was going to be the villain of the season, even if they are only a villain of a season, you could do so much with them. I don't think we're going to do some of the crazy that could happen with the hood. But like to put this into perspective, here's a few things just to mention that weren't mentioned before. He's able to channel energy through twin pistols. Those are kind of his calling cards. I think this might be fitting for the scene. But then also, this is a little scary. He's known to become possessed and transform into a feral monster with super strength.
Yeah.
That's not what I expect to happen in Ironheart.
Agreed.
But we could give him the potential to do it later, is kind of my point.
Yeah.
And I also think, you dropped Norman Osborn as a big name, but like he has connections with Doom. He has connections with Loki, Namor, and Emma Frost. Like they've made up a team together once before, a villain team, as you were kind of mentioning. These are all names other than Emma Frost, because as of right now, mutants. But these are all names that for the most part, we're seeing active in the MCU. And then on top of this, something I really want to add, because I think this is what gives him the credibility to continue after Ironheart, is he is known for getting his hands on things that are ultra powerful. At one point, he gets his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
being said, on multiple resources, while I was reading this, multiple sources, I should say, but my resources literally was like, this made him an Avengers level threat.
Yeah.
So when you kind of kept highlighting like Avengers versus non Avengers, I think in Ironheart, he's not there yet.
Right.
But he has so much potential to get bigger and to be a bigger problem. And with Doom around the corner, I'd actually really like to see him play a part in that. I know that's crazy to say, but I would actually like to see him be involved in Doom's high court, if you will, and he's one of his buddies helping him during all of everything else when Doctor Doom decides to go AWOL. Like I think that's exactly where this type of character fits.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what you were talking about, his like ambition. And I think what the impression that I got about the character when I was doing my research was he is really good at being opportunistic and finding ways to move forward his own goals. So I think, you could, yes, he has the ties to Doom, but you could go slightly off book from that and say, okay, well, now he's going to support Doom because he sees the Doom as the next big thing, right? He sees where these opportunities are for him to level up through this guy who may or may not be from 616. I think that's such a good point. I actually too would love to see him do that. Again, you're bringing in a big name in Anthony Ramos. He's someone who's very famous. He's from the original cast of Hamilton, folks. Like he is well known. So give him the opportunity to go ahead and play a bigger part than just this one film. This character is well connected. Not only is he bringing people together, but he's finding those opportunities to either fight people like the Avengers or the Defenders, but then also find these really important relics, like you mentioned. The one other thing that I really want to bring up that I think is super interesting, because I've been seeing a lot about the raft lately. People are really zeroing in on it again, which I think it is the most like underused elephant in the room in the whole of the MCU. We've had the raft forever and we've never really done an inventory about who all is in there. But I think we need to think about like It's the Red Hulk. It is the leader. Jessica Jones, what is her best friend? Her name is Betsy. Oh,
It's been a while.
I want to say her name is Betsy. I personally find her character so annoying. But she is she drives me nuts. She's so whiny. But she is an enhanced individual who basically like gets a little power hungry and kills people. Like if I'm remembering the second season of Jessica Jones
So I
correctly.
haven't watched the second season, so I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, well, at the end of season 1, basically it hints that, sorry for the spoilers, but these shows have been out for like 10 years, folks. At the end of season 1, it's hinted that her best friend is enhanced. Like something
I
happens to
definitely
her. I
missed that
forget.
hint.
Oh, it's where she like she kicks the apple and she catches it. She's like super agile now. And basically she's enhanced in that way. And then she goes on to be like a vigilante like Jessica, but she like starts murdering people. So she becomes like low-key a serial killer and they actually have to put her on the raft. So she is canonically in there, especially now that we know Kristen Ritter's back. She is canonically on the raft right now. Then you think about how the Hood ends up on the raft in the comics, which isn't a huge surprise. A lot of our big villains end up there. But if you go with my theory slash manifesting final scene, you're sitting there, you've got Anthony Ramos in a cell, you've got whoever plays Betsy, you've got Harrison Ford, you got the guy who plays the leader, you've got a nice group of folks over there. You've got John Walker, who I'm pretty sure at one point is the warden of the raft. So I wish and I hope, and I don't know if they're ever going to do this, but I hope that we actually spend some time there because I think we're putting players on the board and we're having, we just had a scene there from Captain America. But that is something that I think could be a really interesting connector, especially when you put someone like a Hood who is known for bringing villains together and connecting them and having them work towards a common goal.
Yeah, I guess my thing is in that way, knowing what we're moving towards, unless it's going to align with Doom, I don't see the reason for it. And maybe this is because, and guys, we've talked about this before. As far as I'm concerned, Doomsday and Secret Wars is like a stop point because everything we know about the MCU is not going to be exactly the same after those two movies happen. I know we're not saying it's a full reboot, but we know that things are going to change drastically after these two movies. So I guess like if it's not played out to feed into those movies, my thought process is what's the point? We're going to have so much change on the other side, plus the mutants starting to come, that I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be as valuable anymore to tell that story wherever it could be going.
That is fair. I think that that is a good point. I will say, I think you're right, soft reboot, but something like Who's on the Raft. And look, I just may be fixating on one thing, and that
You
is
definitely
entirely
are.
possible. But like, hear me out though. You might have something like a soft reboot happening. That is something that you could easily have remain the same after a Secret Wars, right? I trust me that I'm going somewhere with this. I don't remember, and we would need Norman Osborn on the board. I don't remember what initiates his dark reign where he basically like gets a ton of power.
I'm pretty sure it's Secret Invasion.
That's what I thought. Obviously, we're never touching that property again. But if we do find another way to initiate his dark reign, you could bring in the Cabal, go with a slightly different roster, pull in people from the raft. I'm just saying, you're putting a whole lot of villains in one place.
Well, that is what jail is.
Shut up. It's something that's been a through line for a long time. I just think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially like I said, I just want John Walker to be the warden for like 5 minutes. It just
Well,
feels
he's
like
currently a new Avenger
right. So why can't they be in charge of the raft? I don't know.
because they're
But
fighting for their lives to be able to be Avengers.
whatever. I'm saying in the future. I just think again, there's a lot of opportunity here. I would love to see Norman Osborn again in live action. Obviously, Willem Dafoe is top tier. I think there's opportunities to tell wider stories with the character that were not possible when Sony was doing it on their own. So I would like to see maybe something like that not go away just because we've had one stellar actor do it. Just be open to the possibility. And I think this character could be a big part of that.
If I'm being honest, I don't see this character continuing after Ironheart. Just based off of the knowledge we have of kind of every other villain, I don't super see them or the Hood moving on after this. I mean, I don't think he's gonna like die. I think if anything, the Boots and the Hood get taken. They can be an open ended kind of thing, maybe. And I think he goes to jail or something of that nature. And that's also open ended, where it's like he's not going to be completely off the board, but we shouldn't really expect to be prepared to see him make another appearance. But I think, and not to digress this because it is important to think about the Hood, but it would be bad of us not to at least mention a lot of this also kind of depends on where Riri goes after this series, which we don't have to go into deeply. And obviously, we haven't watched it yet. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think kind of seeing where her character's going, like, I don't know what her fate is as a character. Without even this series, I don't know where she belongs. I don't know what chess piece she moves in the bigger scheme of everything. So I think because I don't know that, it's also really hard to kind of be like, do I expect her villain to be of importance later on? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's a lot of variables here that we just won't know until we watch the show. I do think, though, I am excited for this particular villain. I was a little wary, mixing the magic and the tech, but I think you're right. If they lean into more of his criminal background and then knowing he has things like literally this thing called Hood's Gang, where he has people who are working together for nefarious things, and it sounds like Riri is going to get caught up on that. In that, it could be very interesting then to kind of have this like morally gray interplay between our antagonist and our protagonist. And I think he's a uniquely qualified villain to be able to lure her into that type of life and into those mistakes. So I think in some ways that makes him perfect to be her eventual antagonist because they're going to be allies at the beginning.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that's what even the trailers have kind of already set up, was showing us he wants her on his team. And he
Yeah.
definitely thinks that she's young enough and easy enough to manipulate for him to do that. And obviously, that isn't what holds true. So it will be very interesting. It'll be interesting to see the shift in them as well, or more specifically, him, obviously. But I think he's actually almost the perfect villain for her, because it's not just like some dude with a gun. Hey, Punisher. Like, it's not, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's not just like your average Joe who just decided to like be a menace on the streets. It's a significant villain. It's somebody we actually have comic precedence with. And he could go on to do bigger things. We don't know if he will, but he has the potential to. And it's also really can show her skills, because she's not just fighting somebody off the streets. She's fighting a guy who actually does genuinely have supernatural capabilities.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I also think she just got back from Wakanda, where she literally fought Namor's people. It was a pretty wild experience, I'm sure, for her. So, for her to have been fighting at that kind of level, at the scale of something like what happened in Wakanda Forever, and then come back and then be expected to just fight every regular old robber on the streets is a huge step back. It's not going to move her forward. It's not going to challenge her in any way. And I like what you were saying about the fact that, like, he's not just some regular criminal, he's someone who has those advanced abilities. And not only that, but then you add in the added layer of their emotional entanglement in the sense of like, he's going to be someone who she learns to trust, who they work together, they collaborate. I hesitate to say maybe they even build sort of a friendship. And then there's the betrayal, the inevitable break. And so I think it's going to be a really cool opportunity for her to grow as a character emotionally as she deals with having to fight someone who once meant something to her, but then also having to continue to level up her own skill as she's fighting another enhanced individual versus taking a step back and again just fighting some random person.
Exactly. And I think it will be a good relationship between our main two, our antagonist and protagonist. I really do expect to have a very solid relationship between the two of them, both on the same side, with quotes, of course, and against each other. I think the push and pull is what makes a story between a protagonist and antagonist work.
Yeah.
And so I do hope that that's what we see. I think he is a good match. I really do. I, again, don't know if he'll continue past this. Precedence has kind of said no. I could see places he fits. I could see ways he could be a problem.
Yeah.
But again, precedence has kind of said not really to these kind of characters. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one. Obviously, as we're watching the show, we'll see what happens. But I think the Hood as a whole is a very interesting villain, and also one that was like never really meant to be a villain. And then he kind of fell into it on pure accident. And now we have, and I feel like those are almost the worst villains, the ones who never actually mean to get there.
You know who he reminds me of actually? He reminds me of Sandman. Like that whole story of like
Yeah,
doing it for your
that's a great
family.
example.
Yeah, and then falling into a life of like becoming enhanced. I mean, Sandman's is irreversible. Obviously, the Hood, he chooses to put on the outfit all of the time, but or every time. But the idea of like becoming enhanced, doing something for your family, and then basically having to choose that life and to continue that. He was immediately, as I was reading his story, I was like, oh my gosh, those are two characters who have such parallel and interesting stories, but then you also feel so empathetic, right? You're like, you're not a bad guy. Like, I see why you're doing this. You're doing this for your girlfriend. You're doing this for your
Well, even the
daughter.
Vulture is another good example.
Yeah, like it makes them. I mean, Gore the God Butcher at a different scale, but like you saw why he did what he was doing. I think those make for the best villains, and I think that's why the Hood is going to be a very compelling one because you understand how he got to this place. It started from a place of trying to provide for his family, and then the greed just got out of control. And so I think that'll be really interesting to watch as Riri's perspective shifts too over time.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Me too. I think on that note, we're going to save any other thoughts for our predictions episode, which will be next week. There's going to be a lot to come with that one as we try to dissect the trailers that are probably going to mislead us anyway. So stay tuned for that. You can follow us on your podcast platform of choice if you would like to make sure that you're not missing any of our future episodes. Website is down below if you would like to check that out. And if you're enjoying our show, you can support us via our Buy Me a Coffee link, which is also in the show notes.
You can also follow us on all of our socials, which are linked in the show notes as well. And as Taylor mentioned, next week we will be starting, I guess we kind of started our Ironheart coverage today, but we will be fully starting it with our predictions episode, which will be out next week. We are very excited for the show. As of right now, sounds like the first 3 episodes are all dropping all in one night, but we'll keep you guys updated next week when we actually hopefully have a for sure release schedule with it all. Either way, we are very excited for Ironheart. We hope you guys are too, as Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.